Hi, this review is going to be in part video response to God Emperor Leto II. I recommend that you check out his channel. I'm going to put the link in the description below because one of his most recent video features one of the books in the Joe Devers Lone Wolf series. For those of you that do not know what Lone Wolf is, it's basically a series of game books similar to, for example, Fighting Fantasy, where you choose your own path, your own actions. It's like a role-playing game with a certain path that you can take, and there are choices. There are different ramifications or pathways that you can take depending on your choices. And I commented on that video that I really enjoyed the video game and the tabletop role-playing game, the one brought out by Cubicle 7, because I think there is an older one. I don't remember if it's a D20 based system or game, but the current one, I think it's really cool. However, I haven't seen them bringing out some new supplements or books or expansions or adventures, so that's a bit worrisome because I think it's a really good role-playing game. And you are at a certain power level below what you would like to see when it comes to epic confrontations with the main villains, with the Dark Lords. So I commented on that on the video game that is also really cool. And God Emperor Leto asked if I could bring out a video. I was planning to bring out a video eventually, but I decided to speed it up a bit just to clarify some things about the video game, how it compares with the game book and the tabletop role-playing game. So this review is going to be similar to my other video game reviews. I'm going to put a link in the description below. I'll see if I can create a playlist of all of my video game reviews. They are quite bare bones. They focus more on some deeper aspects of the game. If you want to see gameplay and graphics and sounds, this is not going to contain that. There are other reviews here on YouTube that do an amazing job at covering and displaying those aspects of the game. And I'm also going to put a link to the trailer of the video game in case you haven't seen it. So this video review is going to focus more on comparing the PC game. I think it's also available for the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4 or 3, I'm not sure. So this review is going to focus on those aspects, on how it compares with those old school classic experiences. And speaking of old school, I highly recommend that you check out God Emperor Leto's II channel, because he focuses a lot on old school RPG stuff, books, games, and such. Well, let's start talking about the graphics of the game. I think the graphics do an amazing job at representing the world of the Lone Wolf, and I will talk more about that later on, of the setting itself. And because this game, you can run it in pretty much almost any computer. In fact, my computer is quite the toaster or the potato, to put it in a way. So I think your computer will be able to run the game with no problems, with no trouble at all. The graphics look great. It's a 3D environment. You have 3D models, and the world looks quite vibrant. There's you can see the effects of the snow, how it's really cold, the weather. In case you are moving through some ethereal places, you also see like the shifting of energy or power. So I think the graphics do a really great job at painting the world and how it is sort of high fantasy, medieval Europe type of setting. Now when it comes to the sounds, there is no voice acting. There are some grunts and growls and different sounds that the characters make while they are fighting, but there is no spoken dialogue, and I think that's better because that way you feel like you are reading the game book. You imagine the voices. So overall, when it comes to sound and graphics, I think it does a great job at representing the world of the Lone Wolf. Now let's talk about a bit of an introduction to what the lone wolf is. The basic premise of the lone wolf is that you have this character that belongs to an order of what I would refer to as um, medieval fantasy Jedi, because they are warriors, but they also wield sort of like psychic or psionic powers or abilities. So they are really skilled with weapons, but they also do like telekinesis attacks, and they can heal with their minds. They have this sort of clairvoyance or precognitive ESP type of abilities. And the lone wolf, the main character, the first book starts with the main character being the only survivor of a raid that was carried out against the monastery of the Kai Lords. The Kai are these sort of warrior psychics that I was telling you about. They are all members of noble families, and they are tasked with protecting the lands. I think it's a very good way of expressing noblesse oblige in a fantasy role-playing game, that you have this class of nobles that enjoy all sorts of privileges, but because of that they have to fight the major threats head-on, much unlike in real world. The nobility does nothing to protect people. In fact, they are, most of the time they are attacking people. So in the case of the lone wolf, this video game takes a short while after the first book, if I'm not mistaken, or perhaps even after the third book. I'm not exactly sure, but at the very least this is not the beginning of the story. And there are some spoilers in this video game. If you haven't read the first book, at least it's going to contain information about a certain traitor. So be mindful of that. If you want to play the book, I recommend that you check out the first game book first before playing the video game. But if you don't care about that, just start playing the video game. It only contains a few minor a potentially major spoiler and a few minor spoilers, in my opinion, when it comes to the game books. So in the case of this video game, the main character, the lone wolf, is now a bit on a more of a position of power when compared to his first adventure. He's the lord of a land of in fact, he's the main action. It has to do with a village that is being attacked. So that village or town is part of his domain, and he needs to protect that town. So the game starts right away with the journey of the lone wolf heading at full speed towards that town to protect it from all sorts of evil monsters, and trying to rescue the people if there are any survivors left. Something that is really cool about this game is that all of the actions that you take level up your character or affect your character in some way. It really feels like you are playing a role-playing game, a traditional tabletop RPG, but also you still feel like you are reading the game book. You have this huge book. The menu of the game starts as if you are opening this big tome, and you are flipping through the pages as you are adventuring into the story. So every time you reach this sort of multiple choice section, that if you want to do this or that, it's going to affect the way that your character levels up or develops. So for example, maybe you reach a certain point where there are enemies and you see like they are distracted, and you see this as the perfect opportunity to take action against them. Maybe you decide to just attack them head on. In case that you do that, maybe it's not the most intelligent choice. You may actually get wounded because of that, but you're also going to build a lot of muscle. If you decide to take a more tactical approach, perhaps using your psychic abilities, because even if you do not specialize on your Kai powers, any sort of telekinesis, mind healing, etc., you still have access to those powers. But if you use them every time that you can, they are going to level up. They're going to be stronger than your other capacities. Or maybe you rely on being stealthy. Maybe you want to flank them, or maybe you want to use the help from the natural world. That is, if you interact with animals and the environment, you can actually become a sort of like a beast master character later on. You can summon a wolf to help you during fights. I think that would have been a really cool way of playing the game. However, that was not my path. Most of the encounters that I faced, I decided to either take them on in melee because I love close quarters combat. But every time I thought that my character was going to be greatly outnumbered, then I relied on my Kai powers. For example, creating a sort of um, destroying parts of the environment with my mind, so that the debris or different pieces of the terrain got in the enemy's way. They tripped, or sometimes chunks of the ceiling fell over them. So my character became a sort of balanced character between melee and mind powers. So there are many ways in which you can level up your character. If you want an assassin thief type of character, you can have the lone wolf be like that. If you want a character that is more a sort of like a psionic user or wizard type of character, you can also do that. It all depends on your choices, and they are not without a cost. Like I said, for example, if you are using your mind all the time, it's going to drain your psychic power meter. If you are using melee constantly, your health could potentially go down even before a fight. So there's always a risk involved. Now, who are these enemies? In the world of the lone wolf, you have these dark lords. Imagine that a world where there are not just one Sauron, like the Sauron in the Lord of the Rings, but many Saurons. They feel like that, very powerful lords, like dark gods, you could say, but they cannot act freely over the world. They need to corrupt the terrain, the environment, so that they can move, they can take action. And because most of the world is out of their reach or their corrupting influence, they need to act through their servants. So in this game, you're going to be facing off against gyaks. They're kind of like goblins, but in the tradition of the Lord of the Rings. These are very dark goblins. You cannot be friends with them. You cannot have sort of diplomatic encounter with them. They are quite sick. All of the enemies here are very dark, very sick. Even those moments when you exchange words with them, they are so twisted. They kind of look like psychopaths. That's a cool detail, is that the lone wolf understands some of the words, the language of these enemies. So sometimes he understands the conversations that they are having between them, and sometimes he can insult them if you choose to do that in a certain situation for strategic purposes or tactical purposes. You can do that. There are also what's their name? Drakkar. I think they are called Drakkar. They are basically these huge barbarians with they kind of look like Jason from Friday the 13th. They have these masks, kind of look like hockey masks, not so much, but it reminds me of that. And you also have other things like I don't remember exactly the name of those monsters. The Bordaks, they are kind of like, you could see them as ring wraiths. They kind of look like mummified wraith-like beings, and they have this huge mace, and they also use mental powers or mental abilities. In fact, sometimes they clash with you. You have like a sort of telekinetic duel with them, and they are quite deadly. There are also other enemies that I forget their names. I haven't memorized the entire bestiary of Lone Wolf. You have this sort of like lizard men, but they are really huge. They kind of look more like dinosaur men. They are so big, like a combination of troll with lizard man. Very powerful. And each enemy has a different way of attacking, of course. Some are stronger than others. Now, because this is a game book or RPG type of experience, you could think that it's a very passive sort of gameplay experience, but it is not. It's quite action oriented. It's basically one of those games where you need to input certain commands. That is, you have action prompts in which you need to press a button several times, or maybe just press it at the right time. I recommend that you play this with a controller. so you have an easier time matching those moments, those inputs, because for example, if you make certain special attacks, you have this like this small ring, and then you have this other larger ring, and it starts to close into the smaller ring, and you need to press a button at the exact time. And if you do that, then you score a hit. Sometimes you fail the attack, or the attack is not as effective. In other occasions, for example, you're using knives, because you can use throwing knives or your crossbow. Sometimes different circles start to appear across the screen, and you need to again match the press of the button at the same time that another larger circle is closing in on them. So you need good reflexes to do that. Many special attacks will not work at all if you do not match those precise movements. Another cool thing is that you can use the summer sword, the sword of the Kai Lords. In this case, you need to press the button as quickly as possible. You need to tap it really fast so that you build up power. I really like it that the different special abilities and powers that you obtain in the game, they never feel useless, or that you can just leave them behind. Even the weaker powers have their use if you want to save your mind power, or your mana, to put it in other terminology, comparing it with other games. So for example, in the case of the summer sword, you sometimes you have an attack that just deals damage to a single enemy, very powerful attack, but it's not as expensive when you use it. Another attack hits several enemies at the same time, but it's more expensive, so it all depends on what you want to do. You have many other attacks, and you have like a cooldown, and depending on the weapons that you are using, you have different special abilities, or you inflict different status effects. So for example, if you are using maces, it's usually about inflicting a sort of stun or knockout sort of attack against your opponent. If you are using swords, you usually deal more damage, or a bleeding sort of effect with them. So it all depends on the weapon that you are using. If you are using a shield, of course you're going to be able to protect yourself better, but you can also dual wield. I really like dual wielding. If you dual wield, you have a chance or an opportunity to counter the different attacks. If an enemy attacks you and you press the button just in the right moment, you counter his attack and you get to attack more often. But it all depends on the type of enemies that you are facing. The storyline is divided by acts, so each act has its own variety of enemies, and you need to quickly identify the majority of the opponents that you are fighting against, so you can choose. Perhaps you are in an area where the opponents deal a lot of damage. It's going to be much better to equip yourself with a shield and a weapon. But if you are in an area with a lot of weaker enemies, dual wielding is going to be a lot better when you use it. I really like the Kai powers. I didn't explore all of the powers of the Lone Wolf, of course, because I didn't develop my character in certain ways. Like I told you, I developed it more on the side of the psychic abilities and melee. So you have some really cool things, like you have this precognition, or just like a sort of sixth sense sort of ability. When you activate it, you have a certain number of rounds in which the enemy attacks you, and if you are quick enough, you counter almost every attack against you. This is not a game that you play on a turn-by-turn sort of basis in a more passive RPG experience. You have a sort of timer, and when that timer reaches the right spot, that's when you get to carry out an action. And sometimes the attacks of your opponents actually cancel your actions. Sometimes you need to make a certain obey a certain input to save yourself from an attack. For example, if you're fighting this huge lizard man, sometimes out of nowhere the lizard man will jump at you and will try to rip off your head, try to bite you and such, and you're holding the lizard man away with your legs and your hands. So it all depends on those moments. You need to react quickly to take less damage, and you have some really awesome finishing moves. It really communicates how the lone wolf is not afraid of facing all of these monstrous enemies. And if you finish off the enemies with these special moves, you obtain a more psychic power that is quite necessary to survive. You also have potions that allow you to regenerate your health, your mind power, but if you as long as you have mind power and the cooldown is set, because when you use an ability you need to wait a number of rounds, so to speak, before you can use it again. But many times I was saved at the right moment because I used my healing ability. And your potions also have a cooldown. You can't be using potions all the time just like that. You also have explosives as well. So there are different approaches when it comes to combat. A part of the game that I felt was a bit tedious, not so much, but just a bit, is that sometimes you need to grind. Your character, your weapons, your armor, you can improve it, but you can only do this by obtaining material, either purchasing that material from different shops or getting it from some encounters or some chests. So sometimes you really want to get your weapons and your armor up to speed or up to their best of their capabilities, improving them, because the enemy bosses in this game, they are really tough. Some enemy bosses, you will not be able to defeat them unless all of your weapons, your armor, your knives or crossbow, etc., whatever it is that you are using, if it's not leveled up to the best of its capacity, of their capacity, you won't be able to defeat that enemy boss. And all of the enemies are going to be having their own different weak points or weaknesses. Some enemies are more vulnerable to melee, some others are better if you attack them with your mind powers, you put them in a sort of like a daze or trance. But other enemies are quite invulnerable to psychic attacks, so it all depends on that, on your tactical approach. Now when it comes to the story, I think there are some really powerful and epic moments, and some moments that were a bit lackluster, but maybe it's because of my personal dislike of a couple of things. One, this game is not exactly a railroad. You choose wherever you want to go. You choose who you want to travel with. Sometimes they give you an option to travel with a certain non-player character, but other times you feel like you are too set on a certain route, or when you are talking to a certain non-player character, and even if you choose a particular dialogue, your character speaks in a way that you wouldn't have. According to the way that you have been playing, your character wouldn't have spoken like that or said that, in my opinion. And this also relates to a non-player character that I really dislike. She's a main character, a secondary character, but she's so annoying, so I would say ungrateful. She's not. She doesn't. I didn't get a good impression of her. Not a very favorable way of perceiving her, but later on in the story you understand why she is like that. But it just felt like they kept pushing this non-player character into your story. In my case, I was always thinking, is there a choice or a way for me to just dismiss this non-player character because I simply cannot stand her. She's so annoying. But there was no choice. You really need to go along with the story with her. So I think it would have been much better if you had a path where you could just get rid of that character and solve the entire situation in some other way. I think there is a sense of mystery throughout the entire game as to who is coordinating all of these different monstrous forces against you and the town that you are trying to protect. You are trying to look for survivors to see if there's some sort of resistance against these creatures, and because you are the lone wolf, you feel so awesome that you are fighting alone against so many enemies at the same time. I highly recommend that you take your time when you find a chest to develop your lock-picking skills. With the first chests that I found, I didn't take the time to level up my lock-picking skills, and later on it was a bit more difficult for me to open different chests. And you really need the things that you find in those chests, either materials to improve your equipment or some weapons or potions and such. So take your time. It's all about moving these lockpicks very delicately with a lot of finesse, and listening that small click that sounds so different from other sounds when you're tinkering with the lock, so that you can open that treasure chest. I would recommend that if you fail at those different lock picking tests or checks, that you reload your game, because you actually break your lock picks when you try to do this, and you failed the check. I think there is a lot of good variety when it comes to the different enemies that you are facing. Like I told you, you have different strategies and tactics to face them. And I think the main antagonist was the correct choice. There are other bosses that are also quite notable or noticeable, but the main antagonist, it makes sense that you are fighting that enemy. I don't want to spoil things. Review is not going to contain spoilers. But overall, I think the story does a great job despite that annoying non-player character. So overall, what do I think of the Lone Wolf? I would have like to give you more details about the plotline, but I don't want to spoil things. The weakest aspects that I would consider of the game is that, like I told you, there are some paths that you feel like you are too set on taking them, despite all of the other choices that you can take, that you want to go here or there, and it felt too set in stone at times. But I really like it how the story of the setting of the world is revealed. First, there is this mystery about if there are survivors in town, and when you go deeper into other places, you explore the wilderness, you obtain more knowledge and lore of forgotten and lost civilizations. Those of you that are immersed in the lore or the background information of the setting, you are going to see many references to the different Lone Wolf gamebooks, including a certain order of wizards. I also feel like that there really is a sense of pressure or anxiety, even anguish, as you go closer to your objective of defeating the main force or the leader of this threat, because the Dark Lords, they are so diabolical, so nefarious, how would you say, so they express so much corruption that you feel like if you fail at your task, the entire land is going to be doomed. That's part of the charm of the Lone Wolf, because you are the last of the Kai. It's up to you, completely up to you, to stop this new threat or menace. I think the character has a lot of badass moments, no matter the situation or the danger that he's experiencing. He always finds a way. Well, if you play right, or if you are skilled in the way that you play the game, there is always a way to come out of a situation while looking really cool. I think there are some very difficult moments. If you are someone who has never played video games, you're going to need lots of practice when it comes to playing this video game, because some bosses, like I told you, they are quite difficult. You feel like if you miss just one or two of those inputs or prompts, sort of like a quick time event, you feel like you're going to suffer a lot for it. You could even lose the battle. Even though they give you some choices when you die, because I'm really stubborn when it comes to completing a game. I didn't take any sort of bonus offered to you after you die. I kept trying until I got the enemy without any sort of help. But maybe some of you will decide to take those bonuses. I actually never explored those options, that you died, you can start the game again with this or that. I think that the annoying non-player character is also a negative point or aspect of the game, definitely. I haven't seen anyone who actually really likes that that character, but it makes sense with how the story ties together in the end of the different events and the secrets and mysteries. But I think that non-player character also is the cause of some uh, weak moments or uncool moments on the part of the lone wolf. It's almost like she is there just to mess up your act. That's how it feels like, if she messes up your mojo, so to speak. But if you're looking for a good role-playing game that feels like you're reading this game book with different ways of developing your character. In fact, the big level up moments in the game is when they are when you defeat enemy bosses and you finally see how your character is turning into a sort of beast master or a melee expert or a master of Kai psychic powers. It's definitely more of a dark fantasy sort of experience. It's not as dark as other more macabre sort of worlds, but everything is always so dark, so gloomy. All of the enemies want to kill you. You almost never find anyone who is on your side. The closer that you get to the stronghold of the bad guy, the darker and more decadent and fatalistic that the world feels. So I actually really recommend the Lone Wolf. Oh, I forgot to mention how I could forget. I forgot to mention the music. The music is so beautiful. I'm going to put a few tracks in the description of this video. The music is so amazing. There are some moments when the music is quite tranquil or calm, like like really calm, or a sort of Celtic feel to it. But when you fight, there is my favorite song is probably, it's the one with the title of For the Summerland and the Kai, and it's kind of like dun 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 dun, like really battle sort of music, really awesome way of fighting with that background music just playing, and it really gets you excited about defeating the enemy. So, well, yeah, especially to God Emperor Leto, I recommend that if you like role-playing games that have a bit of action with those quick time moments that you need to press the button just at the right moment, and you need to tap the button as quickly as possible to build up power, it's definitely a good game. I think it's quite... if you are skilled at video games, you will probably finish it in a couple of weeks at most. Perhaps just stretching it a bit, perhaps even just 1 month. And if you want to replay the game, I think it's worth it if you want to explore other paths, that maybe you played the game focused completely on melee and now you want to create a character that controls wolves, like I told you. So this is really a good role-playing game. It's a shame that there aren't more lone wolf video games, but I really like the combination of that sort of a passive way of reading through the story, and suddenly you're in the middle of a fight, trying to make all of those precise inputs. Well, thank you so much to everyone for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. I'm doing my best to bring out a really long review this week, and those of you that saw my Anima Gate of Memories review, maybe you remember that I said that it wasn't going to be as long as my review of Fight 2nd Edition. I think it's actually going to be longer. It's probably going to take 3 hours. I'm currently at the final stages of editing, just before rendering, and I think it's going to last 3 hours or a bit more. So it's going to take like 3 days to render the entire thing in my potato computer, but I'll get there. And thank you so much to those that have been sending Right Through RPG gift certificates to support the channel. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.